Yeah, so let's move on to the second presentation. It's Alicia Patterson and Joel Lara from Georgetown University, and the title of their presentation is Translational Ethics and Creative Engagements for the Classroom. It's your turn.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm Alicia Patterson here today with my colleague, Joel Delora. We are coming from the Ethics Lab to talk to you about experiential and participatory design for ethics education. So a little roadmap of what we're going to talk about. First, we're going to introduce what Ethics Lab is, the organization we're a part of. We're going to walk you through an exercise we did in an undergraduate level data ethics class, and then we're going to walk you through an exercise we did in upper level data ethics class, and then talk through some development and troubleshooting of exercises like this. So first off, what is Ethics Lab? We are an interdisciplinary team at Georgetown comprised of designers, design educators, and philosophers. We partner with faculty in a variety of fields from computer science to disability studies. We have proprietary courses, so courses such as social media and divided democracy, where we kind of combine our methodology with a sort of philosophical topic. We also have embedded ethics courses where we bring ethics into technical or sort of non-philosophical courses, such as advanced programming or an algorithms class. We kind of want to bring ethics into these sort of technical courses to model the idea that ethics isn't something that you do when you've finished making a product or whatever, but it's something that you do throughout a design process. We also work with external partners by delivering workshops to help organizations think through complex emergent moral issues. So our methods are a little bit different than a traditional pedagogical approach with, such as reading, discussion, writing, though we do those things too. We have a lot of creative exercises and non-traditional assignments. Our designers bring a lot of tools from design education and design thinking into what we do. And part of this is because of how we want to orient our students towards moral problems. We don't simply want them to know moral theories and understand that there are problems out there. We want them to be sort of oriented towards an active engagement with these problems. We want computer scientists who are concerned about the social impacts of their algorithms, or data scientists who interrogate the values in the project that their data supports. And so to be engaged in moral problems in this way requires a sort of practical connection to a sense that a role that a person can play, whether it's large or small, in the kind of work that must be done. So our exercises are sort of aimed around helping our students get in this place of agency towards these sort of complex and sometimes daunting problems, and move not just from critique, because that's critiquing is really important, but also creativity and thinking, how might we go about changing or sort of pivoting and making a difference.
All right, thanks, Alicia. Welcome. Nice to see you all here. So I'm going to be talking about an exercise that I developed at the Ethics Lab for an Intro to Data Ethics course that I am teaching for undergrads. So the overall learning goal of this exercise that I've developed is to invite students to appreciate through firsthand experimentation how the presentation of data is not ethically neutral, even though it can be objectively accurate, but rather involves a series of ethical choices and hence positive responsibility throughout. So the process I've developed in coordination with other colleagues at the lab takes students on a journey in which they make, compare, refine, and then finally reflect upon and critique a series of choices as if they were a data visualization journalist. And they see the impacts and the potential ethical implications of those choices throughout. So as it's designed for undergrads, I've scaffolded the exercise quite carefully, so that it doesn't involve any background in data science, any technical skills, any advanced technical skills or data analytic skills. And speaking to Alicia's point about methodology, it's designed first to sort of bring into view the existence of ethical responsibilities and issues here before we go into the theoretical nature of reflecting on what those responsibilities might be. So I was motivated to develop this after noticing, having some observations about student mindset when it comes to data, and particularly data visualizations. So I think pre-theoretically students can recognize that, or they're sensitive to the idea that some data visualizations can be manipulated in certain ways to make us read data in certain ways and then have particularly harmful consequences. So this example from Fox News here, students can quickly see that the y-axis has been manipulated to make an increase in Southwest border apprehensions here between 2012, Obama's second term, 2013 seemed drastic, whereas if it started at 0, it would seem less drastic. So they can appreciate things like that. But they tend to think that ethical considerations, namely driving up fear about immigration from the southern border, they tend to think that the ethical considerations only come into consideration in cases like that, when there are mistakes, omissions, deliberate manipulations. So ethical harms as sort of result of deliberate or technical failures. So they're more resistant to the view that I'm trying to motivate, which is the view that W.E.B. Du Bois articulated about 120 years ago, and has been more recently articulated by data feminists. Namely, that how we present data reflects a bunch of ethical decisions that we make based on the story we're trying to tell and why, and hence that there are responsibilities throughout the process. So it seemed imperative to me in light of this mindset to try and put students in a hands-on position to make these relevant choices for themselves and thus see their consequences. So let me just walk through the exercise that I've developed. So first, I have students in my class, I've got 23 students. They choose a theme that interests them, and I've given them 4 sort of robust pressing themes, even more so in light of the last few days. Democracy, environment and climate change, gender and sexuality, race, racism, and indigeneity. So for each of those themes, I provide a real database from a respectable source. So in this case, mapping police violence for democracy. And I task each student to have a look through the database and then find a particular subset of data that they think are really important, that tell an important story. So in other words, they're finding the story for themselves rather than us giving it to them, and locating ethical relevance and starting to sort of work with their intuitions about what that means. And then guided by a series of scaffolding things like Data Wrapper, which is a useful online program, and a data visualization guide I provide, I ask them just to formulate the data, to visualize it in a standard graph format, bar chart, whatever it is. And then they play around with the chart elements like color, shape, chart furniture, all those sorts of things, caption, title, and they can see already for themselves the effects that those different choices have. And then this is pressured, I should say, by us doing in class some collective sort of reading of data visualization, so they can see the impact that red on black has, for instance. So I'm trying to get them to liberate some sort of story about ethical significance from what might look like in numbers, and to see the generative role of interpretation. So my goal as the instructor is to get them to see that there is no such thing as a neutral presentation of data, and that they immediately have to draw on non-ethically neutral resources. And by that, I mean something like imagination, empathy, things like that. So then students come to class with this graph that they've found and developed themselves, and then there's a peer review process where basically I ask the students in their groups to say what they see. So they're trying to read the data visualization for the story to see how effective the design choices were, essentially. And they're also in this peer review process seeing how their peers went about the same task in a different way, what stood out to them as important, and if it's the same data set, then if they chose to visualize the same data in different ways. So that's already showing different priorities and different foci. And then in class, I asked them in this crack team visualization, as I called it, to redesign what they've already come to class with in the form of a data visualization. And a data visualization is basically a presentation or even a performance of data in a non-standard creative way, where it's not just visual, maybe there's some sound or some touch, something more multimodal, guided by examples from Data Feminism, which is this great resource. So then they have 20 minutes to create one of these data visualizations that they present to the class, and then the class, in the same way as the smaller groups do, try to say what they see. What is the story here? So they're being creative, they're getting their creative collaborative energy flowing and functioning like a sort of editorial team here. And then, so finally, after we've gone through that process and I've guided a Q&A, sort of critique of what they're doing there, I lastly asked students to write a reflection about the engagement, about what they did, about the different choices they made, the different impacts that they have. And it's only finally here that I asked them to incorporate any kind of theoretical element. So this speaks to the point that Alicia brought up earlier about a way into ethics that starts with real world applications, hands-on, instead of starting with theory, intimidating them and asking them to apply it, we just go the other way. The case study opens up the relevance of theory. So then ultimately the point of this is to put students in the position of making a responsible decision for themselves. And then hopefully, subliminally, unconsciously, they're motivated to really challenge this idea of neutrality, which is arguably impossible to attain, and really adopt this position of a sort of positive ethical responsibility for data visualization. So that's my example. I'll pass off to Alicia to talk about the second exercise.
So the exercise I developed is in an upper level data ethics course, which comprised of master's students and advanced undergraduates. And my exercise involved doing mapping. So the aim of the exercise was to sort of explore critiques of objectivity. So the sort of underlying aim of the class is to look at sort of the assumptions that undergird appeals to make processes or decision-making data-driven or to conduct evidence-based policy. We want students to sort of think deeper into those sorts of things and see why is that seen as such a good thing right now, and how might the idea to sort of dataify things come with sort of things snuck in under the table. So the goal of this exercise was to sort of look at different data sources and explore what our assumptions about good sources of information are, and to consider how there might be trade-offs between sources that are easy to standardize to make larger data sets and sources that are richer, more contextual, maybe contain more information. And again, this sort of key part of our methodology is to sort of take a real world context and immerse our students in it. So my example came from the same book that Joel referenced, Data Feminism, and we supplemented it with our own additional research. So this was an embedded model, which I spoke about earlier, where the instructor works with a designer to sort of take a key concept from the class and try to make a sort of creative, interactive aspect of it. In this case, my primary instructor was a science and technology professor, and then I sort of delivered the exercise within the course. So this particular exercise, we looked at eviction data. As you can see here, there are two different numbers for how many evictions were in San Francisco in 2014. The eviction lab had a much lower number. This is a group out of Princeton University in this anti-eviction mapping project, which is a more grassroots, community-led organization, has a much higher number. Eviction Lab aims to have sort of a national map of eviction data. So their aim is much different than the anti-eviction mapping project. The anti-eviction mapping project's goal is to sort of have very rich local level kind of data for local projects. So as you can see here, this is the anti-eviction mapping project's like sort of data points for San Francisco, the data visualization for this. You can see many, many dots. There's a bunch of reasons on the side that tell us about different kinds of evictions. This is eviction labs. You can see the data visualization looks a little bit different, where we don't get this sort of like rich, detailed information. Instead, we can compare, for example, San Francisco versus Wayne County and Detroit. So at the beginning of the exercise, we gave students these sort of the different information about these two different groups, and then we had them map the different data sources used by the groups.
Sorry, Alicia.
That's right. We used to map the different data sources used by the group on an axis of informative to uninformative, objective to more objective. And this was used as like an inroad to the conversation about what kind of data sources are objective versus which actually convey a lot of rich information about what's going on, the phenomenon that's happening. So for example, the tenant interviews that the anti-eviction mapping project did, students generally thought weren't very objective. They might be hard to standardize. It would be hard to make a national data set out of tenant interviews. It would just be probably really time consuming. But they thought that that sort of data was really informative. In contrast, eviction filings, they thought were objective and informative. So we started to pull apart, why is a certain data source seen a certain way? And how can we kind of understand the trade-off between getting something that gives us a lot of sort of rich, full picture information versus something that we can sort of expand to bigger data sets. So after that, we had students sort of think about what are criteria for an objective data source, and what's the criteria for informative data source. And we can kind of see some of the differences here. So these students said, like, objectivity it's accurate, it's quantitative. In contrast, informative, it can answer the researcher's question. So that's kind of an interesting contrast that the students were picking out, is that something might be standardizable, but it might not as clearly answer the researcher's question. So now we're gonna talk a little bit about how we develop these exercises and, you know, some troubleshooting that if you wanted to add exercises like this in your class that you might go through. So the first is how to pick a case study. The case studies are really important because they're a chance to bring important social issues into the classroom, especially if you're teaching a technical course where maybe some of these social issues aren't coming in already. But you don't have to start from scratch. Both of the examples that we gave were case studies pulled from this data feminism book. Weapons of Math Destruction, Algorithms of Oppression, they all have great examples. The key thing is to think about what's sort of the learning goal of your case study. So in my upper level class, I really wanted data sets that were sort of coming from different purposes that the data generators were trying to do. Both wanted to understand eviction and have data on eviction, but one group really wanted to understand, be as comprehensive about evictions as possible and speak to a sort of local level. And the other group wanted to, as I said, have a data set so you could compare across the country. So this shows this distinctness, different standpoints. Joel, do you want to jump in and talk about how you picked your case study?
Yes, I'll do it very briefly. So for undergrads, I found it important to choose really clear, unambiguous cases of speaking truth to power through data, and knowing that the students are very attuned to issues in gender, sexuality, race issues. The examples from data feminism and from W.E.B. Du Bois that have this really clear narrative. In Du Bois' case, it's the progress of the American Negro, as the term was then, post-slavery. And so the narrative's really clear. It's a really clear case of where the richness of a particular standpoint, namely Du Bois' standpoint as an intellectual black American. So those were the cases I chose, knowing the makeup of the group and knowing the issues that we're tuned to. And then let me just say a couple of words about, so sometimes I think philosophers in particular, we get a little bit nervous about infringing upon an area where there's technical complexity. And so what we do, and the advantage of having designers on board and people with different expertise is we're able to do this. We're able to scaffold quite carefully. So through instructional guides and data visualization resources that can really help guide in a very sort of almost didactic form to do the basic technical things, so that we can then focus on the issues that we really care about in ethics, which are the normative richness of concepts, of how they're presented, the affects that are involved, and the effects that visualizations can have. We also find it very important to do this slow lead-in process. So my case illustrated this through the homework 1, then the exercise, then homework 2. This sort of format we found works quite well. And just to speak back to an earlier point that Alicia made about embedding, so the exercise that I developed would work well in a data science class where I could have a technical expert, and we have technical experts at Georgetown who can do this, but we're always looking for partners and people working in different fields to collaborate, because we find that a lot of insight comes from having different perspectives from different areas of expertise, and working together to develop these resources. We also talk about iterations. Everything's an iteration at Ethics Lab. We're always trying to refine and develop and redevelop. So I think we're at time. So let me just close by saying thank you for listening to our presentation, and we'd love to have any questions, thoughts, comments, complaints, irritations.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia and Joel, for this great presentation, for introducing your approach. I'm sure there are a number of questions, thoughts, comments here. Janie, is this so Hallie, it's your turn.
Thank you so much. I think this is really, really important work, especially on the design side. I'm fascinated to hear sort of how you're teaching students who, might end up going into this work and creating this kind of data, how to do so more responsibly. I was thinking, I don't know if either of you are familiar with Kate Crawford's work, specifically her project Exposing AI, but that's something that I studied last year and was really interested in, specifically the way in which she was tracking these facial recognition data sets that were then traced back to use in China to oppress the Uyghur Muslim population and things such as that. So I'm curious how, or if you incorporate sort of this idea that even if data is collected responsibly, even if it's initially even represented ethically, how it might still be deployed for unethical purposes by others.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, and then Joel, since you've designed your data ethics class in this way. So we kind of think of people talk about a data pipeline, right? So throughout the process of engaging in sort of data-driven work, there are ethical issues that come up, and we really try to teach our students about the design process. You start with an idea, you want to sort of gather stuff, and then you're going to iterate and make some sort of product, in this case an algorithm that does facial recognition. So there's issues in the entire way: the data you use, how it's stored, how it's distributed, the end product, the transparency around the product, who gets to use it, all of these sorts of things. So that's something we really try to impress upon our students. You don't get to just checklist, oh, I got a good data set and now I can do no wrong. That's definitely not the idea that we want to teach. We want them to see at every kind of decision point that you might be making with data, that there could be something, there's ethical concerns there.
Yeah, thank you. Is it Haley? Hallie? Thank you so much for your comment. That was great. I'm going to be dealing with the facial recognition stuff later in the semester, so I will be keen to see how that goes. But yeah, I think just to jump on what Alicia said, in our case, what we've done is, I know that some more sort of traditional data science backgroundy students tend to be, and frankly, white men tend to be much more attuned to issues like security and privacy, and less attuned to how data are actually used to impact marginalized communities and to further or instigate oppressions. So what I've done is back set, that's not the right word, but the traditional issues of privacy security. I first have 3-4 weeks where we're just talking about social power. So who is generating data? Who is this likely to impact? Who's going to be benefited from this, and who might be harmed from it? So we look through various cases. I'm keen to look up the Kate Crawford that you're referencing, but we have Joy Bualamwini, who you may know, who Algorithmic Fairness founder. So we're going to be talking about that issue later. But yeah, so having forefronting discussions of social power, benefits and harms, differential experiences, we find really important to dampen the tendency to be like, oh, well, as a white guy, I think it's mostly about my privacy and my security. And so introducing these conversations only through the lens of social power and domination, structures of oppression, helps, I think, to some extent. Oh, thank you for the link.
Yeah, I just want to say, Michael asked in the chat whether Hallie can put the title of the book by Crawford in the chat, and she just put it in there. Also highly recommend her book, Atlas of AI. So thanks a lot for providing this information. Yeah, you really presented great educational approaches. Are they available for people to use those approaches too, or I mean, do you have any links?
Yeah, we have information about some of our exercises on our website. We have some other exercises that we've built for other courses, just sort of like you can take off the shelf. For example, we've one on inclusive HCI, kind of using our methodology. So we've got more information there.
I just dropped the links in the chat. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, because I mean, this is a fantastic approach, but not everyone may have the resources or to
totally
time or whatever to build this themselves. That's why I thought this. Yeah, that's amazing. And also the interdisciplinary team you put in there, and the designers, ethicists, STEM people, computer science people. Yeah.
I can say that our oh, sorry, I think, oh, there's a lag maybe. Sorry, I was just going to say, our lovely looking slides presentation is 100% down to the designer in our team who just beautified it. Our presentations don't normally look that nice, especially as a standard philosopher.
I was going to ask about that, so thank you for saying that.
That's the graphic designer on the team. That's the power of interdisciplinary work.
Exactly.
This has been great. Thank you so much. Good to see you all virtually. I miss being there in person.
Same.
Yeah.
All right. Take care from sunny Southern California.
Thank you. Thanks, Janie.
Yeah, time is basically up, almost up. Are there any other comments? If not, maybe Alicia and Joel, you want to say a few words, and then I will end the session.
It's probably inappropriate, but I really wanted to end the session by saying, Russian warship, go fuck yourself. I've just been very attuned to, can't really take my eyes off the news. I'm finding it very difficult to get that message out of my mind. Doesn't really speak to our presentation in any way, but you know.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, I agree. It's the same here. It's really, yeah, it's really frustrating, and
shows that, I guess it reminds us of, you know, there are real world practical stakes to all we're doing, and that we need to be engaged in the politics of our world, rather than sort of fleeing to abstract, disconnected things like philosophers tend to do. So in that sense, maybe it's just a reminder for us. But yeah. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, you too.
Bye.
Bye.